Li Jian went through several reincarnations and lived every kind of life you can imagine, from strange creatures and even insects. During the thousands of lives, the protagonist met his end 1,000 times at the hands of humans. So began his anger. Humanity was the only species that Li learned to hate, but fate decided to play with the boy, and now he was reborn as what he hates the most, a human being. The story starts with our protagonist Li Jian. He hears his name and his mother responds to the nurse. This is the first time in all lives that Li has a name, but he doesn't seem very happy to live as a human and thinks that people complicate everything. In addition to dividing themselves based on nationality and race, the protagonist also finds it boring that everything has a name and meaning. Even objects. At that moment, he enters the doctor's room with his mother. The doctor reassures Li's mother, saying that everything is normal with her son, but the woman is restless. Why does the boy still not speak or respond when they talk to him? The mother adds that Li didn't even cry when he was born. The doctor listens carefully and says that the girl is fine physically, so it may be psychological. The mother seems to think this psychologist thing is nonsense. Even so, the doctor recommends that she consult a psychiatrist. The woman gets excited and starts screaming, asking if the doctor is saying that her son is crazy. The protagonist hears his mother arguing the doctor. His mother's name is Yang. Li sees her as an uneducated woman who had a sad fate. First, she lost her parents in a battle and then lost her husband in another combat, so Young was left alone with a newborn baby. Things were not easy, and she tried to make do selling vegetables in the popular market to ensure their survival. The protagonist remembers his mother saying that saying nice things to a baby will make him a good person. She continued to tell Li how much she loved him even though he never responded. In fact, the protagonist couldn't understand what it meant. But he also didn't care since it was something he had never experienced before. The scene changes to one person being chased by several others. The man stumbles and falls to the ground. The other guys catch up with him. The fallen guy asks for the stop. Let him go. But the other replies that he couldn't let an ordinary person go. The guy on the ground denies that he is an ordinary, and the others say that they will solve it after investigating. Suddenly, the leader looks up suddenly and sees the protagonist on top of a pole looking at him expressionless. The group doesn't understand how that little boy climbed up there. The worried leader asks him to go down so he doesn't get hurt. But the protagonist keeps looking at the guys and thinks that these adult humans will be perfect guinea pigs. At that moment, Li jumps off the pole and lands calmly on the ground using the frog skill. The group is incredulous seeing the scene. In the next moment, lightning flashes appear under his feet, and Li approaches the group using the cheetah skill. The guys didn't understand what was happening. The protagonist clenches his fists and one of the guys starts to draw his gun to defend himself. But Li uses the Argentinosaurus skill and lands a powerful punch. The guy with the gun falls knocked out. The group is paralyzed with so much surprise. Meanwhile, the protagonist stops after the attack and looks at his hand. He used this man as a guinea pig for his test and confirmed his assumption. This never happened in any of his reincarnations. Our boy was reborn with all the abilities of the creatures he once was in his past lives. Li still didn't understand how it was possible, but he feels that this will be his last reincarnation, which means that it will be the end of his long journey. At that moment, the leader starts screaming, asking what the hell he was. This confirmation was extremely what Li was waiting for. A small smile appears on his face when he realizes that this is his last life and he can finally rest. The other guys continue to stare at Li. The man who is being chased is visibly terrified, while our boy doesn't show anything. Suddenly, he notices a movement and the leader lands a punch in his face. The protagonist is thrown to the ground and stands still for a few seconds. He thinks he doesn't want to be an ordinary human and end up becoming a punching bag. The next moment, the leader prepares to throw another punch because he thought just one wasn't enough. But suddenly his hand hits the boy's head, and he begins to feel an absurd pain, as if the bone in his hand had been broken. The protagonist apparently didn't feel anything. He begins to manifest his past life skills in his mind and grabs the leader by the neck. The man feels helpless. Li makes a few whispers and uses the chimpanzee's strength in his hands. The leader immediately loses consciousness. The protagonist realizes that if he concentrates enough, he can be whatever he wants. His eyes shine more fiercely at this realization. Suddenly, a loud bang is heard. One of the men took the gun and shot him. A bullet hits the protagonist in the belly. He stares at the man and begins to feel weak. He soon falls to the ground. A few seconds pass and the boy does not move. The hands of the man, still trembling, lowers the weapon and eventually drops it. Feeling that the danger has passed, he runs away screaming. The last of the henchmen also decides to run, leaving Li motionless on the ground next to the other bodies. The sun begins to rise the next day. The protagonist crawls painfully and struggles to get up, but it's too hard and he falls to the ground again. The boy remembers that he was shot by that strange thing again. He reaches for his wound and believes that his internal organs have been compromised. At that moment, the boy looks at the sky waiting for his end to come. But contrary to this, his body receives a strange force and then stands up. He rises and his wound slowly begins to heal. This was surprising even for the protagonist himself. In the next moment, he vomits a clear liquid. He faintly realizes that this is thanks to his past life when he was a cumber of the sea. This group is able to regenerate the lost tissues. Now the protagonist whispers softly that he survived. The truth is that he is a little annoyed that he is still alive. But he knows that his survival instincts must have kicked in at the last minute. On the one hand, he feels that it was a bit of fun because he has never experienced this before. This feeds his curiosity. This body was so small but so powerful that it made no sense. Suddenly he hears something. His mother calls desperately for his name in a voice full of panic. The neighbors come out of their houses to see what the commotion was. Young feels panic at the very thought of losing his son. But the protagonist has no emotion at all. He turns to a scarecrow, notices a small bird sitting on it. The protagonist runs without warning and catches the bird with his mouth. Then he lands softly and his mouth is covered with feathers. The boy says that he is not yet fully grown, but he can be self-sufficient if he wants. Then he no longer feels the need to be with that woman. At that moment, the image of his mother crosses his mind and his voice whispers the words, "I love you." Deep down, the protagonist is able to feel a slight emotion. Even so, his decision is made. He turns his back and decides to leave on his own. Meanwhile, in the village, Young is heartbroken and cries out for her son. 4 days pass and Lee has been walking non-stop. He looks dehydrated and weak. His legs finally give way, and he falls to the ground with a thud. Exhaustion claims his body, but his mind remains active. He feels feverish, and as if his stomach is turned. The boy wonders if it was something he ate, and thinks about the meals of the last few days. He imagines that humans should be omnivores and questions what he did wrong. He has experienced this many times, but he can never get used to this feeling. The protagonist thinks he can go from the base and tells himself that he has no regrets. He is ready to face another match. But then he hears a rustle of leaves. Suddenly he leaves the forest. He definitely wasn't expecting it. Young screams when he finds his son lying on the ground, so weak, then hugs him while crying desperately. Lee feels his mind getting clearer and hunger overwhelms him. He tells himself that he wants the food that his mother makes, but he finds it too noisy and wonders how long she will cry. He just wanted to eat. At that moment, the protagonist remembered the words that his mother spoke. He did not know what it meant but decided to repeat it. So he said that he loved her. Those were his first words. Young widened his eyes and the tears stopped. She says she loves him too. Contrary to what the protagonist expected, his mother began to cry even more. Meanwhile, he rested softly in her arms. That day the boy looked at the sunset while he was in his mother's embrace. He thought that this sunset, among all the others in all his other lives, was the most extraordinary and beautiful sunset. He decides to stay a little longer with his mother until he can survive alone. The scene changes to an interrogation room at the police station. A guy tries to convince the cops that a little boy caused all this chaos. He confesses that he eliminated this boy. The detective then asked where the boy's body is. He remembers that when he arrived at the scene, he only had the body of the detective on. The man didn't have an answer to that and just reaffirms that he was sure he shot him. The detective questions if the man didn't shoot Detective On and his counters. The man vehemently denies this. He begs the other guy who was at the scene with him to say something. The other guy has a neck brace and a cast arm, but he just stays silent. Apparently, no one believes the story that it was a boy who caused all the fuss. Being so, the man who was accused is dragged out. He screams, asking why the detective was doing this. Investigators are not buying the story about a murderous boy. The man insists that the boy eliminated On. The other guy who saw everything just looks at the prisoner with a blank stare. Days pass after the incident and life returns to normal. Lee realizes that since that day his mother has always held his hand tightly so that she would not lose him again. Her grip is warm and her smile comforting. Deep down, the protagonist does not hate her. He is just unable to have feelings. The years go by and it's time for Lee to go to school. Soon we see Young arguing because he found out that some students hit his son. The teacher tries to calm her down, but she is not accepting any of it. She says that it is not normal for these fights to happen at school, and someone should be held responsible. Now Young turns to the bullies and threatens to rip off her wrists if they do it again. The protagonist observes his mother and comes to the conclusion that she was always kind to him. The scene changes to two elderly ladies gossiping about Young and Lee. They say that the boy looks empty. Suddenly Young appears and hears all this. Flames of fury practically come out of her eyes, and she defends Lee like a lioness, telling the ladies to stop talking nonsense. Another time in the popular market, we see Young complain about the injustices of the country, claiming that they took everything from her, and now they want to take her only source of income. The protagonist watches as the mother tells the men that her family will go hungry if she can't sell their vegetables. Suddenly she falls to the ground and dares them to go over it. The protagonist thinks about how she fought against everything every day. A few years later, Lee was with his mother strolling through the daisy field. The boy was adapting well as a human. The mother turns to him and asks if he looks pretty. Lee just looks as she smiles. Young stands up with a gentle smile, extending a reassuring hand to her son. The protagonist feels that every time he thinks about leaving, his mother shows an outstretched hand, making his decision very difficult. He suddenly makes a pauses with his eyes full of curiosity and can't help but wonder why she fights every day. Young pauses, trying to find the right words, and answers with the firm voice that is to protect him. The protagonist thinks of these words. Suddenly, the wind gets strong and rips Daisy out of Young's hair. She smiles and tells her son that they better come back, then suggests cooking something special for him. At that moment, the protagonist realizes that the only thing he feared has happened. Now he wants to stay by his mother's side forever. As they walk, a figure appears behind them. The man crouches down, grabbing the fallen flower, and watches them leave. His presence is dark. He gives a scary smile and looks at the protagonist, saying that he finally found the monster. This is one of the surviving detectives of that chaos that Lee caused. At that moment, our boy feels a shadow, but his gaze is fixed on his mother. Whatever happens, he is not yet ready to part with Young. Since the world is world, the survival of the fittest, it is the implacable law of the jungle. The weak fall to the strong. There is no escape from this endless cycle. It is seen as the natural order of life, but not all ends are easy. Some are eliminated only to be used as pieces by humans, others are for science, and some to carry money. These murders are pathetic to the protagonist. He thinks about how humans are responsible for all these results. Yet life keeps turning. Now Lee is 12 years old and has adapted to human society. His neighborhood has been changing rapidly over the years. Roads have been built and buildings have started to get taller and taller, but not everything is sunshine and development. Industrial smoke rises, polluting what was once a crystal-clear stream. Some riverside factories outside his house have also been built. A little later, the protagonist arrives at his house. Young is lying in bed unwell. The scene changes to a few days ago when Lee was eating with his mother and spat out the food. She questions if there is something wrong and scolds him. Young, who explained that these fish are not easy to catch, then asked his son not to be demanding. Lee preferred not to eat. The woman then decides to eat in his place. Back in the present, the protagonist regrets not having stopped her from eating that. He approaches his mother and begins to take care of her. Young watches him and gives him a smile. But our boy doesn't smile back. He gets up and his mother asks if he's going to school. Lee doesn't answer. Young asks him to enjoy his day. Meanwhile, in a busy city, people interact. Vendors call the children who run around. It's a scene of normalcy. The protagonist has set up a stall on the corner of the city and is selling apples. He thinks about many things while selling. Humans have destroyed the earth for convenience, and this development seems to erode themselves. Some people have to bear the cost of all these changes. He reflects as he drops the rotten apple among the healthy apples. Out of nowhere, a hand reaches out to touch an apple. The man says it looked delicious and asks how much it costs. Lee replies that it is 10 won. The man bites the apple and says it is expensive. The protagonist stares at the man while remembering that the rules that humans make as laws serve to keep things under control. But every now and then someone breaks them. In the past, he broke a rule. That rule was the murderer. The next moment, we see that the man who bit the apple is that same survivor from years ago. The detective says he wanted to stop by earlier and see how monsters like the protagonist have grown. The man gives that mocking smile, asking the boy why he was pretending to be a human. Lee remains silent. The detective comments that Lee still has nothing to say and orders his men to arrive. Suddenly, a crowd gathered, curious to know why a little boy was being handcuffed. The men wonder if they can really take a boy thus. The detective declares that Lee is being arrested for being a spy. Our boy remains emotionless. The detective says ominously that if he is a spy, it means that his mother is also a spy. He adds that his men are on their way to his house now to pick her up. Lee's eyes widen at this news. The detective cruelly says that Young is very sick and probably won't endure the interrogation. Suddenly, a giant energy revolves around the protagonist and the ground begins to crack. This destruction is visible to everyone. The man also realizes this but remains controlled. He advises people to stay away if it is important to stay alive. His minions exchange confused looks. At this moment, the protagonist destroys the ground, leading the crowd to wonder what kind of power they are witnessing. Lee springs into action and runs quickly, disappearing in front of the men. The crowd explodes in disbelief. The detective calmly says that this boy is a monster. The protagonist recognizes him as the man who called him a monster back then. This man severely underestimated him. Lee tells himself that this detective has no idea what he is capable of. It was on this very day that humans unleashed a tremendous disaster. A few years pass and the scene changes to a sprawling city. Lee is in the crowd. He comments that despite the physical weakness of humanity, they occupy the first place in the food chain thanks to a fundamental characteristic: communication. Precise and detailed communication has allowed humans to form societies and develop at a rapid pace. He thinks about it as he moves through the bustling crowd. Despite the chaos around him, the protagonist reflects that there are also words embedded within him, words he can't forget. Our boy recalls his mother's last moments and wonders if they are a blessing or a curse. The scene shifts to the past, When Lee was threatened by that detective and ran towards his mother, his pace accelerates, running faster and jumping in the air like a superhero. He falls on a dirt road with determination and activates his legs with an intense speed. Still at that time, two detectives commented on how crazy it is to call a 12-year-old boy a spy. They talk about the lieutenant who put his career on the line by bringing a huge force to get the boy. One of them replies that he can understand why. His friend then asks why he was against this operation in the first place. The man looks at his hand as he remembers Lee's face and the horrors he witnessed years ago. He takes a deep breath and replies that he was against it because he was afraid. That same day, the police prepared to break into Young's house and drag it out. Suddenly, the protagonist comes flying and arrives just in time. He lands behind them, and the guys wonder how the boy got here so fast. They turn around and find an exhausted child. Lee looks at them with an intense gaze. His presence raises questions. The detectives didn't expect to see a child. One of them asks if this is the boy they're looking for. The men are skeptical and think that Lieutenant Kim may have overdone it this time. Someone asks, what can a boy like him really do? Anyway, the leader orders them to take him in for questioning. The protagonist clenches his fists. Just then, a door opens and we see Young visibly ill. All the men looked at her expressionlessly, not knowing what to do. The woman's eyes focus on her son. One of the men says something about Young looking very sick, but the leader says that orders are orders and tells the men to take the two. Young doesn't understand why they want to take her son. She gathers all the strength she had and screams, calling everyone in the village and saying that they have kidnappers in her house. She calls for help and screams a little more. One of the men wonders where she gets so much strength to scream like this if she is practically turning into a corpse. Someone replies that maybe she really is a spy. At that moment, someone punches Young, telling her to shut up. The slap makes her stagger and she falls. Lee's eyes widen when he sees his mother hurting herself and he feels goosebumps running down his spine. The boy is boiling with rage from head to toe. The guy next to him turns around when he notices small cracks under Lee's feet. That slap was the last straw to make the protagonist lose his sanity. Minutes later, the men's bodies are scattered everywhere. Our boy continues with a strange calm. Young looks at the scene in disbelief, proof of a fight they probably didn't expect. Her tears are mixed with dirt as she looks at her son. The protagonist realizes that he did it again. Suddenly, a vehicle stops. That Lieutenant Kim starts telling the other men that he had warned that this boy was a monster. He exclaims triumphantly, pointing to Lee as the boy stands there. Kim warns her men not to get too close or else they will end up being eliminated as well. The protagonist clenches his fist and anger boils under his calm facade, ready to face his next opponents. Suddenly, Young puts himself in front of his son while shouting that she was the one who did all this to these men. The mother tried to redirect the blame to her. The woman who seemed weak moments ago remains strong. Ready to protect her son, she reassures that her boy has done nothing wrong. The soldiers are surprised by Young. They note that she barely has the strength to eat, but now she is strong, screaming at the top of her lungs to protect her son. At that moment, images of happy times flash through the protagonist's mind, a past with more sun and fewer fears. He looks at Young desperately. Suddenly, a tear runs down his cheek. The boy, who had never shed a tear in his entire life, now had tears running freely down his face as he realized that his mother would give her own life just to protect him. Young continues to scream that it's all her fault, ready to sacrifice herself. The cops are surprised by her boldness and ferocity. Meanwhile, the protagonist was sobbing softly. Soon the lieutenant loads his gun and prepares to shoot. He lives in Young, and at the last second points at her leg. A bang is heard. The shot ends up hitting the protagonist because he places himself in front of his mother to protect her. His eyes shone with a strong blue light. The lieutenant laughs happily, convinced of his invincibility. He then orders his men to shoot the boy. A subordinate resists, saying that the mother and son are not resisting, so it would be better to just arrest them. The lieutenant gets nervous and yells, asking if the guy wants to end up like the others. Panic increases among his men, and the lieutenant gives the order again. The guys, they obey and point their guns. Young watches in horror. Bullets rain down on them. The protagonist begins to tell himself that he can. He repeats some words like a mantra. At that moment, Lee explores all his skills and catches a bullet in the air. He doesn't bother and will do anything to protect his mother. Young falls to the ground. Seeing this scene, Lee becomes an impenetrable wall, each bullet ricocheting off his body. The word armadillo echoes in his mind like a protective shield. The shots continue and everyone is shocked by the boy's defense. Young can't even blink. She sees her son ready for another round. The protagonist's eyes, shining with rage, meet the lieutenant's fearful gaze, who orders his men to keep shooting. Lee prepares for another barrage of bullets. He has no choice. He just has to struggle to do it one more time. Suddenly, his mother's presence is felt. She jumps in front of Lee and wraps him in her arms. The lieutenant is surprised. The woman has now put herself in the line of fire. The protagonist's eyes widen in horror. The mother tries to reassure him by saying that everything is fine. Tears form in the prota's eyes when he realizes what is happening. Bullets hit Young, and she is thrown back. powerless to do anything. Lee watches the horror unfold before her eyes. He tries to say that word that was impossible before. The boy calls her mommy. Young is still conscious. She reaches out and touches Lee's cheek. In her son's mind, the memories show a tender moment with his mother. Their gentle smile, they share the gaze of two souls united by love and heartache. Their tears run down his cheek, reflecting the agony within. Young's hand lowers slowly and falls. His last signs of life disappear. Suddenly, a small drop of water creates ripples in the darkness. Young opens his eyes and is somewhere else. She asks if this is heaven. Suddenly, Young turns around and sees the protagonist crying. Her smile cuts through a storm. The woman remembers that Lee never cried. Not even when she was a baby. She says it with humor and bends down to hug him. Lee breaks down, apologizing for everything. He is confused and doesn't know what to do, or why does he have these powers? His mother's passing hits him again, the guilt falling on him like a wave. The protagonist wonders, why did this have had to happen to her when it should have been him? Young whispers that having him was his greatest blessing in the world. The protagonist tells her that he will follow her soon. His mother pauses for a moment and holds her shoulders, giving the last piece of advice. His mother's steady gaze captures her promise. Lee's eyes widen, listening to his mother's words. Young's lips move smoothly and the protagonist nods, listening to his mother's words. Suddenly, he is back to reality, lying on his mother's cold body. His mother's last words echo in the dim light. She said that no matter what happens, no matter what it takes, she just wants him to do everything to live. At that moment, the protagonist looks at the lieutenant. A new and stronger kind of flame erupts from the boy. His mother's last words were forever etched in his heart, fueling his anger and determination. Some questions echoed in the air about why was the lieutenant so obsessed with Lee. In fact, there are several reasons, but the answer was simple: pride. Humans are confident about their abilities to understand everything and fear that which they do not understand. That's why they try to eliminate anything different. Young is now lifeless on the ground. His last words were for his son to survive until the end. Lee feels the loss deeply and decides he can't live with these despicable humans. Surviving to the end sticks like a mantra. To fulfill this desire, he may have to hurt or even eliminate humans again. The protagonist remembers Young's dream and it comforts him. No matter what it takes to survive until the end is the goal. At that moment, his enemies watch him. Suddenly, the protagonist starts running and leaves the scene behind. He jumps on the roof, casting a defiant look at the lieutenant down there. The man goes crazy, asking what his men are doing. He screams that the boy is escaping and insists that he is weak now. Everyone gets in the car and starts casing our boy. Lee runs to the daisy field where he used to go with his mother. The car stops over the flowers. Once again, memories of peaceful times among these flowers have flashed through Lee's mind. He keeps running until he finally slows down as the car approaches. It seems that now a confrontation is inevitable. The lieutenant taunts him, thinking he cornered him, but the protagonist asks if the man thinks he would run. So he simply says that he couldn't do it in the village, or else his mother would get hurt. He apologizes with his hands covering his face. The lieutenant wonders why he is apologizing. Lee apologizes those people he eliminated before, and the ones he eliminated today. The boy also apologizes to the people who are about to be eradicated. In fact, these apologies are for their mothers. The protagonist says that everyone was loved, and has loved ones, just like him. The lieutenant mocks, believing that they still have the upper hand. Lee recognizes that he made some mistakes, but adds that it is exactly how they act. The boy points out that humans eliminate without self-awareness and destroy everything. They screw everything up. The lieutenant's henchmen are confused. Lee begins to speak out loud that he has always wondered why he received these powers, but now he understands. Suddenly, the air crackles with intense energy. Even the henchmen can feel it. Blue stripes appear around him as the brute force builds up. Lee can feel it deep in his bones. He repeats that humans are destructive and good for nothing. The ground begins to crack under his feet. A whisper comes from his lips where he says he exists to bring about the extinction of the human race. With that, the ground below him shakes. The group retreats, realizing the true weight of their threat. It seems they are not so confident now. The lieutenant looks up. Lee is now in the air, leaving the trembling gang frozen. He comes back down like a comet. The men scream as Lee falls like a hammer. A resounding bang marks his arrival. A few minutes later, the jeep and bodies are on the ground. Lee looks at what he did. The leader of the gang is trapped below a rock. He says he knew the protagonist was a monster. The man declares that monsters like him have to be eliminated. Even now, he calls Lee a monster, insisting that he should never have existed. The boy recognizes the truth in his words. He approaches the lieutenant, saying that he is right, but he failed. For that reason, his end is declared. Lee begins to raise his hand. The lieutenant's eyes widen in horror. The protagonist adds that not a single human in this world will be left alive. The blow hits and the noise echoes loudly. Night comes and Lee walks. He carries a figure gently in his arms, lost without direction. Maybe it was because of exhaustion, but he could almost hear Young's voice whispering through the night. Scenes flash through his mind. Memories of a gentle smile, words of comfort shared. He remembers the day he was born. Since that day, the protagonist has heard the words "I love you" 1,000 times throughout his life. It was then in the dark loneliness that he replied that he loves her too. Now the protagonist walks through the grass. He thinks about the 10 years he spent with his mother. Time meant little to someone who lived eternally. His mother was a gift he never knew before, the greatest happiness he has ever had in his entire existence. At the moment, every step is heavy with sorrow. He can't help but blame himself for Young's end. No end has been so painful before. His mother's last words are a comfort. He pauses but knows he must move on. Each step is an obedience to his last wish. He murmurs softly that he will do anything to live. The days go by and winter arrives. A hunter is lying in the snow aiming his gun at a pheasant. A loud bang is heard and the bird falls. The hunter laughs. Suddenly the protagonist appears there. The hunter is confused, scared by this boy. He asks how Lee got here, then explains that here is a hunting ground and it is dangerous. The boy remains silent, watching the lifeless pheasant. The hunter asks if it is his first time seeing one. Lee coldly questions if the man is proud. Suddenly his eyes shine a supernatural light. The hunter soon asks where are his parents. The protagonist replies without hesitation that they are no longer alive. The man silently takes a step closer and becomes visibly worried, then asks if he is not cold. Lee is speechless at the unexpected kindness. The huntsman takes his hand and says he will take him to his house. A little later, the two arrive at a modest house in the snow. The hunter calls his mother and says he is back. She braved the cold to greet them. He scolds his mother for being outside in this cold, but then he soon says that need a bath. Minutes later, everyone sits down to eat. The sizzle on the grill. Lee sits in silence. Loud noises break the moment. The hunter explains that it is sounds of mountain construction next to them. He can't stand his curiosity and asks what the protagonist is doing on this mountain. He just replies that he walked here. The hunter nods his head, assessing the situation. He admits that there is nothing here. It was not a good environment for a child to grow up. Thinking about it, the hunter decides to take Lee to the village tomorrow. There they will find someone to stay with the protagonist, and he will be able to go to school. Meanwhile, our boy eats slowly, savoring the heat and normality. The hunter gently jokes with him, saying that maybe they will teach him some manners at school. Lee is there with wide eyes. He doesn't say a word. Night comes and everyone goes to bed to sleep. Lee looks at the pictures scattered around the house. A husband and wife holding a baby. The next picture is brighter. A father and his son leaving while the mother watches, smiling. Finally, there is the hunter and his mother together. Now they are sleeping. The hunter is sprawled on the floor, snoring. His mother naps peacefully on the other side. The protagonist is between the two of them, totally cozy. It's a new feeling for the boy. The next morning, they are all outside getting ready to go to the village. The hunter and grandma exchange glances, realizing that maybe it got a little big. The protagonist wore an old man's clothes. The hunter notes that his old clothes are a little ghastly. He kneels down and tries to fix his pants. Lee's eyes briefly soften, a hint of gratitude, masked by his usual behavior. The hunter turns to his mother, assuring that he will be back soon. After that, they walk along the snow-covered road. Suddenly, the protagonist comments aloud that his mother doesn't seem to talk much. The man laughs heartily, calling the proto-joker. He says she doesn't speak because she's deaf. Lee frowns and asks why he keeps talking to her if she can't hear. The hunter replies that even if she can't hear what he's saying, it seems she understands what her heart is trying to say, and that's all he really needs. The protagonist ponders the man's words. Suddenly, the raindrops begin to fall slowly at first, but quickly turn into a torrential rain. The man exclaims that it is raining. A hint of concern echoes in his voice. The rain shows no signs of abating, and he suggests that they find a cover. The two find a shelter nearby, but they didn't know they were just below the construction site. The man watches the rain while waiting on the small roof. Suddenly, the earth shakes and many trees have been cut down. A sudden and violent collapse happens right on top of where Lee and the hunter were taking shelter. The landslide is over in minutes. In the sequence, we see the hunter trapped under the landslide. The protagonist was luckier because he was thrown a few meters away. The man coughs, spitting mud and rainwater. He soon asks if the protagonist is okay. His voice is almost inaudible. Our boy runs towards the man. He frantically digs the mud everywhere and screams, "Go get him out of here," but the man is losing consciousness. His last words are calling for his mother. The protagonist looks in shock, frozen in place. The rain continues unabated. The boy stops digging because he knows it is useless. He remembers that the hunter was telling him the night before that there was construction going on the nearby mountain. He looks sadly at the sky, and the man's voice echoes in his head, saying that the name of the mountain is Risotto. The storm shows no signs of stopping. The protagonist walks slowly along the muddy path with the hunter's body on his back. He tightens his coat tighter. The lady is standing waiting for his return with umbrellas in her hand. Her eyes widen in shock as she watches the scene. Her steady gaze rests on her son. The umbrella slips from her fingers, hitting the floor. At that moment, it's as if it's all over. The day after the storm arrives, Lee is quietly lost in his thoughts. He stands outside the door, his mind spinning with the previous events. His eyes closed for a moment and memories come to the surface. The anger he felt for those policemen and their final destruction. On that day, the protagonist promised to eliminate all humans in the world. He was still thinking about it, but something keeps him hesitant. Lee wasn't sure if it was the right thing to do. He ponders a little more and another memory comes up. It was a memory of his mother looking at the exam paper that was left completely blank. Young didn't take it well and asked if he was really the same as her. The protagonist, in his usual behavior, just says he didn't know the answer, then left it blank. The mother says that just write something, anything. Lee replies that he didn't know the right answer. Then comes a moment of quiet understanding between them. Now back in the present, the protagonist seems to have made a decision. The scene shifts to the nearby mountain. It was the opening day of a new resort, or resort as the hunter called it. Someone cuts the ribbon and the applause fills the space. There's a crowd of reporters there today and the owners are trying their best to impress. A big shot and a fancy coach shake hands, looking confident, but suddenly something catches his eye. A small figure in the distance appears. It's our protagonist. The big shots don't look happy and one of them tells security to take the kid out. The security guard runs to block his way, telling him to stop. At that moment, something stops the guy in his way. Behind Lee, there is a trail that leads to the bodies of the other security guards. The protagonist hears his mother's voice in his mind. She said that even if he didn't know the answer, he should still solve the question. With a warm smile, she asks, who cares if he gets 0 points? The mother says that it's okay to be wrong. This advice was his guide to his decision now. At that moment, the guard stumbles backwards in horror. The protagonist trusted the phrase that he should solve the matter even without knowing how. He has already made up his mind and is tired of hesitating. Meanwhile, the guard sounds panicked, but the protagonist is calm as always. With a chilling tone, he says he will eradicate everyone without hesitation. That's what he really wanted to do in the first place. A few hours have passed, and soon we see Lee. He examines the city below, stained with red liquid. Knowing that every day he gets stronger, his thoughts are of intense extinction. The boy tells himself that he knows it is not an easy task, but he is ready to face it with his head held high. In a flashback, we see the chaos left behind, a mass of fallen enemies, a testament to his determination. Lee stands alone with a single thought that he can do what must be done. After that, the protagonist visits the hunter's grave. Next to him was another grave, of the hunter's mother. It seems that the shock of losing his son was too much and she passed away in his sleep not long after. Lee absorbs his memories of them. His weight is turned into fuel, so he decides his next move. First, he needs to test the extent of his powers. Now the boy can be whatever he wants because he holds the collective strength of his past lives. The only problem is that in the end his body remains a normal human body. The scene changes to a year later. Lee is on the tracks of an approaching train. The train driver goes crazy with what he sees in the middle of the tracks. The train advances towards him and the conductor screams desperately, while Lee remains calm. The collision scene is crazy and the boy is thrown into the air. The train driver rushes to save the boy but is surprised. He looks for Lee everywhere and finds nothing. Meanwhile, the protagonist had already taken his distance. He had just harnessed the power of the shells. Another year goes by and Lee now has the ability to communicate with other living beings. It wasn't words. It was more like telepathy. He was able to understand them on a deeper level. What's strange is that being in a human body played the biggest role in developing this ability. Most living beings on this earth have an affinity for humans, which was really a mystery. The scene fast forwards again to 5 years later. Lee has become an adult and reached his prime. He has matured and reached the pinnacle of physical form, now wants to stay in that state as long as he can. So the boy used his powers as a turtle to make it happen. But time flies and 10 years pass. The world is not what it used to be. Heavy smoke rises from the factories, darkening the sky. The rivers are clogged with plastic waste, a sad testimony to human excess. Yet in the midst of this despair, nature seems to hold its breath, hopeful against all odds. Now the protagonist's communication skills have expanded greatly. His connection with nature is no longer just with animals, it is with the earth, water, and even plants. He can feel it deep down. Living souls are rooted in even the simplest objects. Lee sees himself connected to the planet and can feel his suffering. He looks at the modern city confronted with human progress, colliding with nature, but he was not yet ready. 30 years pass, and the protagonist's journey has been about mastering his powers. Years of relentless training expanded his abilities, and there was no limit to what he could accomplish. In addition, he had found a way to combine all his different powers. His eyes burned with blue intensity. Lee says that finally his preparations were almost complete, and it is time to act. At that moment, he is on the top of the mountain meditating silently, feeling its power. Flames erupted from the ground. The protagonist channels immense power, combining heat with more heat, causing pressure. If he repeats this several times, he is able to cause an earthquake. The boy recalls his past, a great earthquake that he had already triggered before. There are 6 locations where he can shake the earth like this again. Once the earthquakes are triggered, this will divide the continents into 36 fragments and half will sink. The protagonist assures himself that no human could ignore this disaster. This will be the end of many people. An animated view is shown of him standing on top of a mountain of skulls. Lee can't explain it, but he has a feeling that this is exactly what is going to happen. He looks up at the sky, realizing that humans will not be the only ones exterminated. Many other species will be driven to extinction. But still, this is something he feels he must do. Even if it is difficult, Lee ponders that he has been alone for decades and wonders if he should take one last look at how humans have been living recently. But he quickly contradicts himself because he has been observing humans for a long time, so he believes that there is nothing new. However, his eyes suddenly flicker with memories, glimpses of his mother, and the kind hunter who gave him shelter. Then he recognizes that maybe he should take a look. It won't get in the way of his plans because he can start extinction whenever he wants. He convinces himself of this and puts out the flames from his feet, then walks slowly towards human civilization. The protagonist says that the destruction of this race will have to wait another day. Everywhere is full of careless human remains. Even in a lush forest, there is still something left by humans. The protagonist realizes that no matter where he goes, no place has been able to escape the touch of humans. He is alone on the steps of the road, walking in the quiet night. That road was once a forest full of acacia. Lee feels very angry at what the humans were doing. He thinks about just sending them. Suddenly, a loud horn is heard. Lights flash in front of him, but the protagonist stands still with his eyes shining a fierce blue energy. The driver screams to avoid chaos. She dislodges a large stone that flies towards the car. Lee watches indifferently as the car loses control and approaches. At that moment, the driver's face catches the attention of the prota. His eyes widen and he asks what was happening. That girl was very familiar to Young. He is ecstatic and sees his mother's face in his memories, putting a daisy in his hair. The woman in the car looks exactly like Young, his beloved mother. Without thinking twice, the protagonist looks at the rock that is about to hit the car and goes into action. He advances by piercing the rock with brute force. The rock splits in two. The driver squeezes the steering wheel hard, trying to take control of the car. She opens her eyes to take a peek, and the unexpected happens. Someone's face appears looking at her upside down. The girl lets out a loud scream. Meanwhile, another huge rock comes rolling down the cliff. The rock plummets and is pointed directly at the car. The next moment, it hits the protagonist in the head. He is taken by surprise, and the impact leaves him in shock. The car believes violently and causes Lee to fall a few meters ahead. The driver opens the door and runs to him. The boy doesn't believe this is happening. He managed to maintain his abilities unconsciously, but seeing his mother's face again made him lose control. The woman kneels, checking on him. She seems to be screaming something, but Lee could only think about how similar she is to Young. His consciousness begins to fade. It's been a while since he's felt it, the famous feeling of departure. But soon after Lee sees flashing lights, he suddenly opens his eyes and comes face to face with the woman who looked like his mother and a nurse. As we can see, the protagonist had his hair shaved and his head is bandaged now. The boy feels completely lost. The nurse gently suggests taking it easy as he just had surgery. He touches the bandage cautiously. The nurse briefly explains that they couldn't identify him, so they couldn't get a signature from his parents. But the surgery was urgent, and so they moved on. At that point, the nurse asks, "What's your name?" Provoking a blank stare from the protagonist. He pauses, thinking that he hasn't actually used his name in decades. Then reflects for a moment and says in a strange accent that he doesn't remember. The woman is surprised that he has a southern accent. Lee sits quietly as he digs through his memory. Then he remembers someone familiar with a warm smile calling him Lee Jian. After remembering this, he gives his name to the nurse. At that moment, the doctor approached and began to report the protagonist's medical record, which was all unknown. The only thing they are sure of is that the boy has memory problems. The woman does not seem happy to hear this. 3 months later, she goes to a police station. They searched about the protagonist, even among older people, but could not find a match for his identity. In addition, his fingerprint is not registered. They also failed to find him on no security camera. The woman has heard all this before and just wants to know how they intend to deal with the problem. They have never seen a situation like this before. The man says that there is a high chance that he is an undocumented foreigner. The woman just wants answers. But the policeman smiles awkwardly, saying that having a guardian would make things easier. The woman ponders the idea carefully, and an idea well in the mind. Meanwhile, in the hospital, someone is calling for Lee's guardian. He sneaks his gaze to the sides and nudges the woman. She approaches the counter and signs the form, which gives her guardianship over the protagonist. The woman pauses and then turns to look at him. Their eyes meet for a second. She feels some kind of connection with Lee. A little while later, the two leave the hospital. The protagonist looks at the woman and asks why she is in a bad mood. She looks for a second and insisting again that it was not her fault, so he shouldn't think he has a debt between them. The protagonist asks why she keeps repeating things like that. The girl can't answer. She approaches and tells him that she put her age as 24 on her documents. Then with the menacing look, she says that she is older than him and is 34 years old. They both stare at each other darkly. Anyway, the girl reminds him to formally talk to her. Because she is older, Lee replies that it doesn't matter. She then reminds him again to speak respectfully. Because she is much older than him, the protagonist comes back with an absolutely expressionless face. In fact, if you count all the reincarnations, he is approximately 3 million years old. After this conversation, they move on and the woman makes it clear that she will get him a job until his memory returns. At that moment, she stops suddenly. It turns out that Lee started to hold her hand. The woman screams, asking what the hell he's doing. She scolds him for taking someone's hand without permission. The protagonist innocently asks why can't he. The girl angrily explains how it works and says that he must get consent. Lee listens carefully and asks directly if he can hold his hand. The woman is not sure how she ended up in this place, but the protagonist politely asked to hold her hand and she let him. At that moment there is a snap and he has a vague memory of when he was a child with his mother in a field of flowers. Before he realizes he's already crying, tears rolled silently down his cheek. The woman is surprised, asking why the hell he's crying, but not even the protagonist understands why. He had no idea why.